Good morning.
You all have a good evening. You look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning. Is that a good description? I have to ask you, did anyone try to talk to you about this case, or did you discuss the case among yourselves while you were out for the evening? All right, very good. Thank you. All right, State, you may call your next witness.
Call Melissa Watson Rogers.
Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give following this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Would you state your name, please?
Melissa Rogers.
And is that Rogers with a D or without a D?
It's a D.
Okay. And we're also going to refer to you as Melissa Watson. Was that your name on December the 6th of 2014?
It was.
Were you actually a member of the Pope Volunteer Fire Department on December the 6th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
And are you aware of what's been referred to as a structure fire, but I understand it wasn't a fire at 52 Old Highway 51 in Cortland?
Yes, sir.
And did you actually respond to assist Cortland with your duties from Pope Volunteer Fire Department?
Yes, sir, I did.
And tell us about that initial structure fire.
We were told to help them for a mobile home fire. And when we got to scene, Cole said, oh, they can find us smoke, so we helped with ventilation and everything and waited till Cole let us clear and come back to our station.
Cole is Chief Cole Haley, Cortland Fire Department?
Yes, sir.
So there was no fire there on that scene?
No, sir.
Where did you return?
Back to our station.
Okay. And I believe you advised me that you always ride in the fire truck. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
And after being back at the Pope Volunteer Fire Department for a short time, just so the jury knows, how far is it between Pope and Cortland? From the Pope Fire Department down to Cortland Fire Department, how far would you say it was?
Maybe 6, 7 miles, if that. I don't think it's that far.
Shortly after you returned to the Pope Volunteer Fire Station, did you hear a tone go out from Cortland again?
Yes, sir, we did, for them to have a vehicle fire.
Shortly after hearing about the vehicle fire, were y'all waiting to see if y'all needed to assist?
Yes, sir, we were.
Did you receive that call?
We did.
How did that call come across?
For Station 14 units to respond out on Heron Road for a vehicle fire, and then EMR as well. And you could hear the panic come across the radio with Cole requesting us.
Were you an EMR?
Yes, sir.
Are you still a member of the Pope Volunteer Fire Department?
I am.
Do you still handle your duties as an EMR?
No, sir. Not right now at this time.
What vehicle did you respond in?
The Rescue 143.
And Thomas Haley has already testified. Is that the vehicle that pulled up behind where Jessica Chambers was laying?
Yes, sir.
When you got out of the rescue, what did you do?
I went straight to Cole.
What was Cole doing?
Cole had Jessica laying on her side, and I went to Cole, and I knelt down to her back or whatever and helped him hold her and try to comfort her.
And I believe they've heard of what's referred to as the engine, or Engine 81 from Pope. Where were they situated in regards to that engine?
The engine, you might as well say, was here. Cole was here with her, and then our rescue was here. I mean, it was not very far apart.
He in front of that engine or behind that engine?
Behind the engine.
Okay. Now, as you approached Cole, did you notice the condition of the young female?
I couldn't see her face. All I got was her back, and her hair was badly singed and fried, and you could see her shoulder and arms, and she had burnt spots on her back and everything, and her skin was just flushed red.
Was Cole trying to talk to her?
He was.
Was she trying to respond?
I believe she was, but I couldn't make anything out because, like I said, her face was to him and her back was at me.
Did you ever get a good look at her face?
No, sir.
All right. You wrote, Do you do all the paperwork for Pope Fire Department?
Yes, sir.
And did you do the run report for Pope Fire Department?
I did.
And you also wrote a very brief statement, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that, you described that she said her name was Jessica Chambers. Did you hear her say Jessica Chambers?
I cannot swear to it. Between having to do the run report and get all that information filled out, and then we were asked to do another initial statement.
Do you recall hearing her say anything?
No, sir. Because like I said, her face was towards Cole and her back was at me.
Is there a paramedic that we've heard from already that is actually also on the Pope Volunteer Fire Department?
Yes, sir. Casey Austin.
Did Casey Austin arrive shortly behind you?
Yes, sir. He did.
And what did you do when Casey Austin arrived?
When Casey got there, I got out of his way and let him do everything he needed to do. And I went and got back in the rescue to try to ease my mind of everything I just seen.
Would you agree you turned it over to the more experienced person?
I did.
And you went back to the truck. And what did you begin doing at the truck?
Working more on the run report as to showing which of our firefighters were there, just trying to describe, what we were doing as far as helping with the vehicle fire and with the EMR assist.
Did you have any other contact with Jessica Chambers that night?
No, sir.
Your Honor, I tender the witness.
Cross-examine.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's Miss Rogers now, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I believe you said that you went to Old Highway 51 back on December 6th.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you rode in the truck?
Yes, ma'am.
I know Mr. Hale mentioned that you always ride in the truck.
Yes, ma'am.
What does that mean exactly?
I'm usually riding. I don't go POV because I don't know all the little back roads that well and everything.
Yes. Do you know how long that Pope and other persons were out there at Old Highway 51?
I'm not sure. I can't swear to it without the run report in front of me.
Okay. Do you remember too much about being there at all?
I remember there was a lot of smoke and we helped with the ventilation and everything.
Okay. But
And
as
then we
far
were
as,
released from the scene.
okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Are you
Okay.
fine?
And you rode there with someone else?
Yes,
You-
ma'am.
Okay. Who did you ride there with?
I'm not sure who was driving.
Okay.
Like I said, I would need my run report because I keep all that on there.
Yes. Okay. Let me move you now to the scene on Heron Road. As soon as you got there, you helped Cole Haley
Yes, ma'am.
and basically helped keep Miss Jessica on her side. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
All right. There is a report. May I approach the witness, Sean?
You may.
Ms. Rogers, do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was written on the same day? Is it 12/6? Can you
Yes,
see it at the
ma'am.
top?
We wrote it that night. We were asked to when we were sent back to our stations.
Yes. Okay. And, Your Honor, at this time, I would like to have this report marked and entered into evidence as an exhibit.
Any objection?
No, sir, Your Honor.
All right, be marked and admitted. Pass it to the court reporter, please.
That'd be number 13, Judge.
13, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Rogers, if you will, just read that, please, for the jury.
Got on scene, helped Cole Haley, 801, hold the female patient up on her side, trying to keep her body covered best we could. All she had on were her underwear and said her name was Jessica Chambers. She was shaken and burned badly. Casey Austin got beside and helped with MedStat when they came on scene.
Okay. So In your statement, I know you also testified that once Casey Austin got there, you got out of his way so he could
Yes, ma'am.
take over. Okay. And you couldn't see her face.
No, ma'am. Like I said, her back was to me.
Okay. And her face was more to
It was
who?
facing Cole.
Was facing Cole. Okay. I attended the witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
Redirect.
No further questions, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Rogers to be finally excused.
All right. Ma'am, you're finally excused. That means you can leave the courtroom or you can remain here, whatever your choice. All right. Next witness, please.
David Gamel.
You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give involving this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and so help you God.
What is your name?
David Gamel,
David, where are you employed?
employed at Hefner Motors,
And what do you do at Hefner?
technician, automotive technician.
And do you have a second job?
Uh,
That's probably not paid.
Yes,
Okay, what is that?
volunteer fire department,
And which fire department do you work for?
Pope.
Were you a firefighter on December the 6th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
And do you remember that day?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember getting a call to go to or assist Cortland around 7 o'clock on a fire on Old Highway 51?
I was out of pocket for that call. I did not go to that one.
Okay, but the Pope Fire Department did, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you also get a second call about an hour later, a little over an hour later, to go to Heron Road?
Yes, sir.
And where were you when you got the call?
I was back at the house then. I was sitting in my living room. Tone went off for 8. Our radios, we can hear different frequencies. I was listening to it. I heard Station 8 respond to it, and when they got there, the distress and the fireman's voice on the radio, and asked for Station 14 to come and assist with the scene.
When you say distress, what do you mean?
It wasn't his normal tone of voice. You could tell he had seen something that had him, I guess you'd say scared, or in easy terms, freaked out. It was just a different tone of voice when he was talking on the radio.
And who is he?
I believe it was Jody Morse that come across the radio.
Okay. And did you in fact respond?
Yes, sir.
And how did you get there?
POV, personal vehicle.
Okay. And did you know the area that this was, where to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you live at Pope or Cortland?
Lived just outside of Pope, right there at Enid Lake.
And how long did it take you to respond?
I actually responded before they were toning us out. I was already in my vehicle on the way. I'd already done left the house. Tone was going off when I was there. It probably took me about 3 to 5 minutes to get there.
Okay. And what did you find upon your arrival?
Upon arrival, got there, engine 81 was parked on the left-hand side of Heron Road. Their brush truck was actually pulled in, kind of making a L blockade around the vehicle. Got out of the car. Jessica Chambers was laying covered up with a blanket and one of the firefighters' turnout coats. They had laid on it trying to keep body heat on her. I walked up. Daniel Cole was standing over her, leaned down, kneeled down, asking her, "Who did this to you?" She rolled around, because she was kind of laying on her right-hand side. When she come back up, you could hear her say it sounded like Eric or Derek, but it was a struggle for her to say what she was saying.
Well, tell the jury, were you able to see her face?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury, please, what her face, her nose, mouth, and all that area looked like.
Her body was completely covered in burns, almost looked like shoe leather. Her face itself, she was unrecognizable. There was black charring. It looked like the inside of her nose. When she would breathe, the skin and everything on the inside of her nose, it would literally come out of her nose and then go back in. Her mouth looked like it was solid black, like a piece of charcoal, you know, and it was all on her face, the same way around her mouth and everything.
Did you ever see anything like that, David?
No, sir.
You ever seen anything since like that?
No, sir. Hope I don't ever again.
So you said that you heard her say something that to you sounded like Eric or Derek.
Yes, sir.
And was she talking like you and I are talking here
No,
right
sir.
now? All right, explain to the jury.
You have when you're on a scene, you have, you know, several trucks running. The ambulance was parked next to it. The fire truck, she was at the back of the fire truck. There's another brush truck. The brush truck itself has a separate gas engine on the back that we pump with. So you got several different engines along with any other vehicles that were on the scene. I don't remember exactly. I remember where 81 was in the ambulance and the brush truck, and then our rescue come in behind. I remember all those where the fire personnel trucks were, but personal vehicles, it was very loud there, like it normally is.
So was it difficult to hear?
Yes, sir.
All right, Dave, the jury's going to be able to go out to the scene with the trucks and everything there. But I guess for the sake of kind of setting the scene up, let's say for sake of argument, this table is Jessica laying there. You would be in the position right now where Engine 81 from Pope would be.
No, sir. If she was laying long ways with her head north,
Let's say this is her head.
if that's her head, the truck was to the left.
Excuse me. That's her head.
If this is her head,
Yes.
this would be the passenger side of the back of the truck. It would have been, the nose of the truck would have been facing towards the railroad tracks. She was laying long ways across the back of the truck,
Okay.
by the back of the truck.
Fire would be up here to the left, is that
The
correct?
fire was around and to the left.
Okay, and the the brush truck would be in this area right over here, is that correct?
We brought our rescue. We did not bring a brush truck. We brought our,
Portland's brush truck.
Cortland's brush truck would have been to the front of the engine on the left-hand side, where her feet would have been.
Fire, brush truck, engine, Jessica, and then your rescue in about this area, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Tend to the witness, Your Honor.
Cross?
Good morning, Mr. Gamel.
Good morning.
You stated that you didn't go to the call at Old Highway 51 earlier that day, did you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And so you did come in your personal vehicle to the scene at Heron
Yes, ma'am.
Road. Okay. And you talked a little bit about where you were working. You were a volunteer with Pope Fire Department?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I'm a volunteer firefighter.
Still are?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And back at that time, you also worked at Hefner Motors?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hefner Motors and volunteer then and now also?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know Eric Hefner?
Yeah.
You do
Yeah.
know him? Okay. Did you talk to that person in any way after this happened?
I mean, I know of him. I don't know him, but I know of him.
You know of him? Okay. And you know him through having worked at Hefner Motors?
No.
Okay. Now, in looking at the scene, or actually, you actually did a report the same day as everything happened, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Is that your signature at the bottom, Mr. Gamel?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is the report that you completed back that evening.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd like to have this report marked and entered into evidence at this time.
All right, any objection? Being no objection, be marked and admitted. That's the court report. All right, Ms. Palmer.
Thank you, Your Honor. I know you testified just earlier that you heard Ms. Jessica say either Eric or Derek, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If you will, just read your statement there.
Arrived on scene, had young girl covered with blanket on ground and fire turnouts at back of engine 81. CD1 was asking her name. Her name was Jessica Chambers. CD1 asked, do you know who did this? She said Eric, and CD1 asked for her last name. She said she did not know. Assisted MedStat with loading of patient to be airlifted by air evac.
So when you completed this at that time, your recollection was better?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. So when you wrote this, you left Derek out of that,
Yes, ma'am.
okay? And why is that?
When you have a traumatizing scene like that, it's stated all through there that there's stuff that will come back to you later. When it is wrote real early, you remember just the specifics, the 1 points, highlights, and you forget other stuff. When you're writing it, things will come back to you later on.
So you would recall the specifics as Eric, that's specific, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Derek would be specific, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You didn't include that, though, in your statement?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Okay. I turn to the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Yes. David, you just brought up something. Was the event that you and the other firefighters observed a traumatic event for y'all?
Yes, sir.
And would you explain to the jury why?
The only thing that I can say when you see a person that has burned and is still moving, the only thing that I could say is all adrenaline is the only thing that kept her alive. I don't know why. Good Lord's the only one that can explain it. But, you know, once you see something, you can't unsee it.
Well, Ms. Palmer just asked you, wouldn't your recollection be better right then as opposed to a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? When you were asked to write that, it was immediately after y'all got back from the scene. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were all of the Pope firefighters that were there that saw this in somewhat of a state of shock?
Yes, sir.
And shock doesn't go away quickly, does it?
No, sir.
And did you have a lot of things racing through your mind as you were sitting there the next morning?
Yes, sir.
And as time has gone by, has your mind had the ability to clear up from this scene that you saw that night?
To an extent.
Is it something that you'll ever forget?
No, sir.
And you're aware that or are you aware that with firefighters that witness things like this, that it sometimes takes a short period of time or a long period of time to recuperate?
Yes, sir.
Most of us, now we have because of what we do for a living, but most of the folks have never ever seen anything like what you observed that day. Is that correct?
I'm going to say so. I can't speak for them, but I'm going to say something like that they probably haven't.
Unless it's on television.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you said to Ms. Palmer a moment ago that things came back to you afterwards, would you say that you also suffered mental trauma from what you saw that day and had to do?
To an extent.
Nothing further.
What instructions would you give this witness?
Mr. Gamel may be finally excused, Your Honor. He is released.
Mr. Gamble, you may be fine excused, sir, or you may remain in the courtroom. Your choice, sir. They call you next witness.
Bradley Dixon.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you are about to give the body in this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Hi, Ms. Taylor.
Would you state your name for me?
Bradley Dixon.
And am I correct saying that's Dixon?
Correct.
And Mr. Dixon, where are you currently employed?
Lifeguard ambulance service here in Batesville.
And on December the 6th of 2014, was that ambulance service, did they go by a different name? They have a different service.
It was MedStat.
And were you employed by MedStat on December 6th, 2014?
I was.
And what is your role on the ambulance today, and what was it on December the 6th, 2014?
Today I'm an EMT, and then I was an EMT also.
Tell the jury what the role of an EMT on an ambulance is.
An EMT helps the paramedic with patient care. I can do basic life-saving roles. I can't push certain medicines that a paramedic can. I can't intubate, but I can do basic stuff.
A paramedic has a little more specialized knowledge, is that
He
correct?
does.
Medical knowledge.
Yeah.
And did you have a paramedic on the truck with you or on the ambulance with you on December 6, 2014?
I did.
Who was that?
Josh Perkins.
And you said you're there to assist the paramedic. What do you also do when y'all take off on a call?
Drive.
And were you the driver on December 6, 2014 that responded to a call on Heron Road in Panola County?
I was.
And did you know what that call was in reference to?
We got a car fire with a possible burn victim.
And when you go to a car fire with a possible burn victim, what is your priority on that scene?
Patient care.
You don't care about the car fire, right?
No, sir.
And when you arrived on the scene at Heron Road, would you describe for the jury what the scene looked like? What type of people were there?
So when we pulled up, there was several first responders vehicles, their personal vehicles, several fire trucks. I noticed a car was on fire also.
Were they fighting the fire?
They were.
Describe the noise condition out there on that scene.
Loud, as you can expect, with 3 or 4 fire engines going. I mean, just a typical fire scene. It's just loud.
When you pulled up, did you see the burn patient?
Not right away. I saw a few firemen behind a fire truck waving at us
Okay.
as they come on in.
And when you pulled up, were the firemen waving on the driver's side of the vehicle or the passenger side?
The rear of the fire truck.
No, what I'm saying, where were they in relation to the ambulance? So on your driver's side?
On the driver's side.
So who was closer, you or Josh?
I was.
So when you stepped out of the vehicle, did you approach the victim?
I did.
And did you see the condition did you briefly check the condition of the victim?
I did.
What was your initial thoughts?
That we needed a helicopter.
And who has to authorize the calling of the helicopter?
My paramedic.
So did you relay that on to Mr. Perkins as he came around the ambulance?
I did.
And did he agree with your assessment?
He did.
And what did he tell you to do?
To go ahead and call dispatch and asked for a helicopter.
And did he begin looking at the patient?
Assessing the patient, yes, sir.
Excuse me. And what did you do?
I got in the ambulance, got on the radio to ask for a helicopter, and then got in the back of the ambulance to get some supplies to take to Josh.
As you said, you're there to assist him.
Yes, sir.
Now, let me ask you, when you first approached the victim, tell me what you noticed about her condition that would say to immediately call for a helicopter.
She was burned over the entire part of her body.
You notice anything about her face?
It was burned severely.
What about her mouth and her
It
lips?
burned. Skin was hanging off her lips, out of her nose. Her eyelashes, eyebrows were gone. Her hair on her head was a big singed ball.
Now, is there a way that you prepare an ambulance to transport a burn victim?
Yes, sir. We just turn the heat on high. With burn patients, they lose a lot of heat because their skin's not able to insulate their bodies anymore. So you keep them warm. We turn the heat on high, and we cover there in several blankets.
Now, it's easy to think that when you crawl into an ambulance that you're in the quiet, cozy confines of an ambulance. Is that actually true?
And that's not true.
Explain the conditions inside that ambulance also.
We have a way to put the ambulance on high idle so it builds more heat for the heater. That turns the engine up higher. That's loud. The heater going is loud. The oxygen mask we placed on her is loud. And then just the overall chaos of us working in the back makes it even louder.
Now, to help you and Josh, was there also another paramedic that was on the scene in that night in his capacity as a fireman?
Yes, sir. Casey Austin.
And so did Casey Austin help Josh?
He did.
Now, ultimately, did you stay in the ambulance until Jessica Chambers was loaded in the ambulance?
I got out to take Josh a sterile burn sheet, and then I returned to the ambulance to prepare it.
And I say Jessica Chambers. Did you know Jessica Chambers that night?
I didn't.
You don't know her?
I don't.
Was she loaded in the ambulance?
She was.
And who got into the ambulance?
It was me, Josh Perkins, and Casey Austin.
Do you know Daniel Cole?
I do.
Did Daniel Cole get in the ambulance at some point while y'all were working on Jessica?
He got in the side door and just kind of poked half his body in to ask her some questions.
Was he still trying to talk to Jessica?
He was.
And what kind of questions was he asking her?
Who did this to you?
Was she trying to respond?
She was.
Can you describe her voice and the condition of her voice when she was trying to respond?
Hard to understand, real raspy, just terrible. I mean, couldn't understand anything she was saying.
Was it normal me and you talking?
No, not at all.
Now, I believe it was put in your report that when Daniel Cole asked her who did this to you, that you thought you heard a name. Is that correct? And what was that name?
Eric.
Now, you also noted that you were able to make out two other words while she was speaking. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the first word?
Thirsty.
All right, thirsty. That requires some movement.
It does.
How did it come out?
Like Hershey, like unable to move her tongue or her lips to enunciate.
What was the other word?
Cold.
Cold. How did it sound to you?
Oh, just, you can't move your tongue or
Now,
your
going
lips.
back to Eric, how did that come out to you?
Eric.
And you said she was unable to move her mouth or her tongue.
Correct.
Your Honor, 10 of the witness.
Cross.
Good morning, Mr. Dixon.
Good morning.
You were the driver on that evening.
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
okay? And basically, your responsibility was for patient care.
Correct.
And you assisted Josh Perkins, who was the EMT at that time.
Well, he was the paramedic. I'm the EMT.
He was the paramedic. You were the EMT. And you thought that you needed a helicopter. Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Prior to doing anything to get the helicopter there, Daniel Cole had gotten into the vehicle where you and Jessica and Josh were. Is that correct?
Correct. While the ambulance was still on scene.
Okay. And you didn't do, you weren't really the author of a report.
No.
Okay. Joshua was, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Joshua Perkins was. Okay. And so what you do recall, though, is that Daniel Cole inquired about who had done this to her while inside the vehicle there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what you recall is that one name was stated, Eric.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And do it for the jury again. How is it that it sounded to you?
Like Eric.
Okay.
Thank you.
So to you, that would have been pretty clear as to Eric.
At the time, that was the name that's closest resembles what
Yes.
we heard.
Yes. Okay. And as far as you're not saying that she couldn't communicate in any way, are you?
The way she was trying to communicate was very hard to understand. Was
Right.
one words. She wasn't speaking sentences like us.
Okay. And at that point, do you recall what time you arrived there?
I would have to see Josh's report to know the exact time.
Okay. But at least it was a point in time that was, you did not get there right when everything happened. Is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And the vehicles that you observed there would have been fire trucks and that type of thing by the time that you and Josh arrived there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. She was already wrapped in a blanket?
I believe she had a fireman's coat around her.
Okay. And then you would have added blankets to her while inside the ambulance there?
Correct.
Okay. Court's indulgence just for a moment.
Just notice one thing. I'm going to ask you one more time based on what Ms. Palmer asked you. Will you repeat the way you heard Eric?
Eric.
Would you agree with me in doing that? You just had movement in your lips.
Not much.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
What instructions would you give this
Your Honor,
witness?
I would ask Mr. Dixon to be finally excused.
All right, sir, you're finally excused. You can return to the courtroom if you'd like, or you may leave, sir. Your choice. May call your next witness.
Josh Perkins.
Good morning. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give involving this case is the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
What is your name?
My name is Joshua Perkins.
And Joshua, where are you employed?
Currently lifeguard ambulance service here in Panola County.
And what are your responsibilities with lifeguard?
I am a paramedic and a lieutenant, which is an assistant supervisor.
And back in December of 2014, were you a paramedic?
Yes, sir.
And were you on duty on the evening of December the 6th of 2014?
Yes, sir.
And did you and Bradley get a call to go to a particular area on Heron Road?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury where you were when you got the call and what was the nature of the call?
We were at our main station here in Batesville on Highway 51. It was, the nature of the call, I think, come out as a just burn. It wasn't really specific when the tone dropped, but it was out there at Heron Road. That's where we got the call and responded.
Were you familiar with where Heron Road was?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you arrived on the scene, describe to the jury, please, the chaos or what was going on at the scene when you arrived.
Well, what I remember when we pulled up, there was a fire truck, pumper truck on the left side of the road for us. Jessica was laying on the ground. She was wrapped in blankets at the back of the truck. You know, the firefighters were at her side. And that's what we found when we got there.
And did you drive or did Bradley drive?
Bradley drove.
Yeah. And you got out, I assume.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did you do once you got out of the vehicle?
Well, when we pulled up, like I said, she was on the left side of our vehicle. You know, Bradley could see her out of the window. As soon as we pulled up, you know, we weren't really sure how bad of a burn we had until we got there. And, you know, he laid eyes on her and just looked at me and said, yes, it's a real burn. We laid eyes,
When
you know.
You did this. What does that mean?
That's helicopter. You know, get over there and, yes, she needs a helicopter. She needs a level 1 trauma center, burn center, which is the med here up in Memphis. And helicopter had been the most appropriate way to get her there.
Okay. So Bradley made that assessment as soon as he got out of the car?
Oh, no, sir. That was my assessment. You know, he looked at me and said, yeah, it's real. And walked around the truck and, yeah, we need a bird.
Okay. So what did you do as far as approaching Jessica?
When we got there, like I said, she was wrapped in some dark-colored blankets. It was night. I've seen some wool blankets or something to that effect. You know, got there and assessed her, and like, okay, we got her on the stretcher, wrapped her in some sterile burn sheets, you know, keep her warm. Got her in an ambulance, had to contact our dispatch to get the helicopter en route, you know, set up a landing zone and all that.
All right, let's back up just a minute. As a paramedic, one of the first things that you do is a visual assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you do a visual assessment of Jessica?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And did you know her to be Jessica at that time?
No, sir. As a matter of fact, when I found out she was 19 years old, I was slightly surprised. She did not look like a 19-year-old girl laying there.
Well, tell the jury about that. I mean, you did the visual assessment, so tell the jury what your visual assessment was.
Yeah, well, she had significant burns over almost entirety of her body. She didn't have much of any hair left. It was pretty much all singed and gone. Like I said, you know, I wouldn't expect what I was looking at to be a 19-year-old girl. When I first saw her, for some reason, I thought maybe she's a 40, 50-year-old woman. You know, she just looked frail and small-framed and everything. But, yeah, she was burnt pretty significantly from head to toe.
All right, let's talk about her nose. Would you notice anything significant about her nose? Was it burned?
Do you have a copy of my report?
Yes.
That I can reference?
Be okay, Jan?
Thank you, sir. No, sir, I don't have anything particularly about her nose here.
Well, was her face burned?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, if her face was burned, it would be safe to assume that her nose area
Yes,
was
sir.
burned as well. Do you remember anything in particular about her lips? Were they burned?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
What could you, or do you remember anything significant about her tongue?
The mouth and throat were blackened with soot, but there was she was still able to speak. The airway was not, you know, swelling like you normally see with a burn of this type. But yeah, there was black soot in her mouth and throat. Yes, sir.
And what life-saving steps did you take at this point?
Well, with a burn patient like this, you have to keep them warm. There's no skin keeping their body heat inside anymore. You have to give them plenty of fluids. They're going to be losing fluid. And that's really the main steps on the first response kind of thing, is keep them warm, give them fluids. She's going to need antibiotics and all that stuff. We don't carry that on the ambulance, of course, but keep them warm, keep infection away is the goal right now.
Okay. And did you attempt to enter or do an IV, a vascular IV?
Not an IV. Most of her vasculature looked like it was thermally damaged to the point of probably not even worth having. So we tried to attempt an IO. The IO drill failed on this one.
All right, let's back up just a minute, because I know what you're talking about,
Yes, sir.
but some of the jurors may not.
Okay. Yes,
All right, we're talking about a vascular IV. Is that an IV that everybody remember be stuck in your arm?
Yes, sir. When I'm talking about an IV, it's the same IV you all know about.
Just a minute, I have an objection.
I apologize, Your Honor. I was just objecting to leading.
You withdrawing the objection? You want
I
me to
am,
do it?
Your Honor.
All right, you may continue.
Is a vascular IV one that would go into the arm?
It can
or
go
into a vein?
Into a vein, yes, sir. That's a
Okay, and that's
intravenous.
what people, when they see IVs,
Yes, sir.
normally think about, is an IV into an arm, hand, anywhere that goes into a vein.
Yes, sir.
What is an IO? that
It stands
you
for
just-
intraosseous. It's osseous means bone. Intravenous means into the vein. Intraosseous means into the bone. It's a needle that is attached to a drill. It drills into the bone, into a long bone that has your long bones are hollow. That's where your blood vessels are made. There's vasculature that takes blood from there into the rest of your system. An IO sticks a needle basically into that hollow space, and you can pour fluid in there just like you can an IV, and it's going to work just the same, just as well.
And I believe you said that the drill, you have to put it in with a drill?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And y'all's drill did not work that night? is
did
that
not work that night, no, sir.
Okay. At some point, did you assist with getting Jessica, or did the firefighters place Jessica into your ambulance?
Well, we were, I don't remember the exact specifics, but, we wrapped her in burn blankets and then put her on the stretcher and got her through the truck, yes, sir.
Okay. And at some point, who was in the ambulance?
I know I was in the ambulance, Bradley was in the ambulance. Law enforcement of some sort. I don't know people's names in law enforcement, but there was a deputy in there, I believe was a deputy talking to her. I believe Daniel Cole was in there at one point as well. But I don't remember the exact specifics of who all came in and out.
All right, do you remember questions being asked of her?
Yes, sir. They asked her multiple times who did this to her.
All right, do you remember what her response was?
Yes, sir. It was Eric or Derek or something to that effect.
Okay. Was she speaking clearly like you and I are talking
No, sir.
right now?
No, sir. She was having trouble enunciating her words and things, pronouncing them. She didn't have much in the way of lips. But yes, sir. She was struggling to speak a little bit.
Okay. And was she transported down to the landing zone?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you have a patient such as this that's going to be flown out, what steps as a paramedic do you take to prepare them for the other paramedics that are coming in from the helicopter?
Oh, we just try to take any life-saving steps we can do, anything within our protocols, there's to make it easy. Anything we can do before the helicopter crew gets there that they might do, is beneficial.
And the LZ was not at the scene where y'all initially responded, is that correct?
Yes, sir. No, sir, it's not there.
Okay, and how far away, do you recall, was the LZ from where y'all were actually located?
It looks like it was 0.6 miles.
And are you in communications with the, I'm not real sure what you call them, but what are the nurses or the paramedics on a helicopter called?
We just called in flight crew.
Flight crew, okay. Are you in communication with them as they're coming to your scene?
Yes, sir. Usually we'll keep there's a certain frequency we use all across the states called statewide EMS. They have it, we have it, hospitals have it, so everybody that works in emergency medicine can communicate with each other. Usually when they're a few minutes out, they'll call, they'll request landing zone information, what they're looking for, any hazards, power lines, trees, stuff like that. They'll request a patient update, a patient wait, things of that nature.
All right, well, I would assume that the coordinates and power lines and all that would be the responsibility of the firefighters to
Yes, sir.
communicate
It's
that.
somebody on scene has to have it. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then you communicate to them the condition of the patient.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember that night what you communicated to the flight crew about Jessica's condition?
I don't remember the specifics of the report, no, sir.
Okay. What was your assessment of her condition as you were getting from the scene down to the LZ?
Oh, just that she has had second, third-degree burns over the majority of her body. She was in shock, I would say. She was trying to talk to us, whenever to ask her a question, but when she wasn't actually answering questions for us, she just generally stared straight ahead.
Did you feel like she was critical?
Oh, absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you feel like these burns that you observed were potentially life-threatening?
Yes, sir.
And once y'all arrived at the LZ, what did you do as far as interacting with the flight crew?
Well, when they landed, they get into the truck when they get out of their helicopter, and we just give them a general rundown of what we got. We've got a female here that's significant burns all over her body. We need vascular access. We haven't been able to obtain that yet. So the flight crew they had their IO, intraosseous. They have the same equipment we have. Theirs functioned perfectly fine. They put their IO in. They started running fluids. Kept her, wrapped up in the burn sheets as much as we could, and loaded her into a helicopter, and they lifted and went to the med.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, Cross.
Good morning, Mr. Perkins.
Good morning, ma'am.
When you arrived on scene there, I would imagine there are fire trucks and many other responders there before you got there, correct?
Yes, sir. There was at least one pumper truck that I remember. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. And you have any idea what time they got there?
No, ma'am. I don't have that access to that information. I don't know what time they got there.
But you knew they were there before you?
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Champion you were reviewing a report just now?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
May.
Okay.
Is that your report?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at this time, Your Honor, I would like to have this report marked and admitted into evidence.
All right, any objection? No. All right, be marked and admitted.
Yes, ma'am.
Number 15, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, Ms. Long.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you will, please, Mr. Perkins, let's just talk a little bit about the timing of things when you got there and dispatched all of that. I think that may be the first page, actually.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. If you will, it says that you made it to the scene at 20:29.
Yes, ma'am.
That would be 8:29?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And at patient, it says 20:30.
Yes, ma'am.
8:30. Okay. And so then you departed, which would have been 20:42,
Yes, ma'am.
which is 8:42, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So at least we know that by the time you got to Miss Jessica, which was 8:30, the firefighters had already been there and at least had some dealings with Miss Jessica before you got there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we're at 8:30, and then you leave at 8:42, which means there were about 12 minutes there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I know in your report There may indeed have been some deterioration in her condition from the point that the firefighters got there that you dealt with her. You agree with that?
I didn't see him. I did not see her whenever the firefighters had her. I would actually say condition did not really change much from the period of time that we had her. She
Still pretty alert.
Well, I wouldn't say alert. Like I said, she was kind of in shock. She answered questions when you would, she would answer whenever you asked her something. Outside of that, when she wasn't being asked or engaged, she would just stare straight ahead.
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
If you will, you did an assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Believe that you see that page, maybe the 4th page. You see where your
The narrative?
assessment is on there?
Yes, ma'am.
You went straight to it. That's good. If you will, please, just if you'd read your assessment.
Okay. All right. Chief complaints, or you just want the assessment section?
Just the assessment section.
Yes, ma'am. On arrival, patient was found wrapped in a blanket lying on the ground behind a fire truck. Patient had second and third degree burns over the majority of her body, estimated at 95%. Patient's mouth and throat were blackened with soot. Most of the patient's hair, eyelashes, and eyebrows were burnt off. Patient was only wearing a burn-damaged pair of panties. Patient attempted to answer questions, unable to understand some answers due to probable burns of vocal cords. EMS was able to obtain patient's name and that she was set on fire by another person named, quote,
Slow down just a little bit, sir.
oh, I'm sorry.
That young lady right there's got to take down everything that you say. Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you, Your Honor.
EMS was able to obtain a patient's name and that she was set on fire by another person named, quote, Eric, unquote, multiple times. Unable to obtain any other information reliably due to patient having a difficult time speaking. Patient repeatedly complained of being cold, constant movement and tremors. Patient appeared to be in shock. Patient's skin was covered in full thickness and partial thickness burns.
Slow down just a little bit. Keep going.
The full thickness burn areas were dry and still moist in the partial thickness areas. Pupils were pearl. Oral mucosa was dry. Airway was being maintained by the patient without assistance. Respirations were elevated but adequate, not labored. Breath sounds were clear and equal bilaterally.
Okay. So, her airway was being maintained by the patient without assistance?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what does that mean?
Like I said, normally with a burn patient, their airway will, if you suffer burns through your throat, the real threat there is that your airway swells up and it closes off, much similar to an allergic reaction, and you can't breathe.
Okay. And so it was being maintained by her without assistance?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And her respirations were elevated but adequate and not labored?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then her breath sounds were clear?
Yes, ma'am.
And equal bilaterally?
Yes, ma'am.
Meaning?
They were clear, didn't hear any adventitious breath sounds on either side of the lungs.
Okay. So I know you testified earlier that it may have been Eric or Derek
Yes, ma'am.
that she said, but in actuality in your report, which, by the way, you did the same day or the next day after?
It's probably, within that time frame, yes, within 24 hours.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And it would have been pretty accurate from
Yes,
when
ma'am.
you did it,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So it didn't include the Derek name, pretty much just had Eric there, didn't it?
Well, when I say Eric or Derek, like I said, she was not able to enunciate as we are. She might not have been able to say the D. It could have been just Eric coming out, and she tried to say Derek. Like she couldn't really enunciate everything correctly. I mean, everything wasn't. It was kind of garbled. Nothing was perfectly clear when she said it. But
Okay. Okay. Well, I just know that when you indicated in your report, it said Eric.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
And then, like you said a minute ago, quotes Eric. So that would indicate to me that that's what you heard and that's what you put on that day,
Yes,
or at
ma'am.
least the 24 hours later, correct? So still at the point, we know that you arrived there after everyone else had, for the most part, and she still was able to at least enunciate to where you could understand it as being Eric with quotes in your report, correct?
I was trying to clarify that Eric, the
Okay. Court's indulgence, just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
If you will, there's a assessment exam. Can you flip to that page for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe the third page.
Says page 3.
Yes, do you see it?
Yes, ma'am.
It says assessment exam.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you see where it says chest?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you read what you would have completed this, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, tell me what it says there about chest.
It says chest. Clear breath sounds left. Clear breath sounds right.
Yes. And mental, it has, she was combative, but she was an oriented person, oriented to events.
Yes, ma'am.
You agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that combative would mean frustrated about the situation? What would that mean?
Generally just not compliant with, remember I mentioned she was moving constantly, tremors, I need
Yes.
to take a blood pressure or something like that. You kind of needed to lay still, she wasn't able to follow commands and do that.
Okay. Yes. I attended the witness, Your Honor. Thank
All
you.
right. Redirect.
Josh, I think Ms. Palmer was trying to paint a picture of clearness as to what your report says as far as Eric. When you said Eric, I believe you said on cross-examination that that's what you thought you heard.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was the Eric, like I'm saying Eric to you right now?
It was not that clear. It was garbled, as I've said. She just was not able to enunciate, as you and I do. Nothing was really that clear. It was just garbled, as I've said.
Okay. And was there discussion in the ambulance about what you thought you might have heard as far as Eric is concerned?
Well, I think whenever she said it, the deputies were asking her, or the ones asking her, or whichever law enforcement agency was there, they asked her, repeatedly, who did this to you, who did this to you, who did this to you, to the point she actually became, I would say, almost frustrated, like being asked the same question again. Whenever she would answer, you could hear a little frustration in her voice, but it was always the same. It was always Eric or whatever she was trying to tell us.
But that's what you sounded like you heard, is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor. He may be finally excused.
Sir, you find excuse. You may remain in the courtroom or leave. Your choice.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, next witness, please.
Darryl House.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give involving this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you today, Darryl?
All right.
What is your name?
Darryl House.
And you need to lean up and speak a little bit louder for me. The jury's got to hear you. And where are you employed?
Pinole County Sheriff's Department.
And how long have you been there?
5 years now.
And were you employed with the Sheriff's Department back on December 6th of 2014?
I was.
And what shift were you working that day?
I was working the night shift at the time.
Do you recall getting dispatched out to Herring Road in Cortland?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you remember where you were when you got the call?
I think I was around the base area when I got the call.
And what was the call itself? Do you remember what the call was?
I think it was called that it was a lady that was on fire. Yeah.
And did you, in fact, respond?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you make it all the way to the scene where she was located, or did you stop at the area of the landing zone?
I made it all the way to where she was at. the scene.
Okay, and tell the jury, please, what you found upon your arrival.
Well, when I got there, they had a stretcher they was putting her in the ambulance.
And what did you do?
Well, when they loaded up, they transported down to the landing zone. That's where I went to the landing zone where she was.
So how long were you at the scene where she was located, the original scene?
No more than maybe 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you get in the ambulance with her at the scene, or did you get in the ambulance with her at the landing zone?
Yeah, at the landing zone.
Okay. What were you doing at the scene prior to the ambulance leaving?
Like I said, I was just standing out there. Yeah.
Okay. Describe for the jury, was it a normal, quiet, peaceful scene, or was it chaotic?
Yeah.
Objectively, if you would ask the question and then give the witness an opportunity to answer it versus giving him choices.
I think that's perfect.
To leave.
Yes, Sean.
All right. Rephrase your question.
Describe the scene for me, please.
It was chaos.
And how was it chaotic?
Ooh, everybody running in different directions.
Was there any structure or order to the scene?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And who was in charge?
At that time, I think Daniel Cole was in charge, I think.
And what did you do when you got to the landing zone?
Well, when I got there, I went inside the ambulance and tried to ask her, who did this to you?
Okay. And how did you know to ask her that question?
Well, the situation she was in, it was terrible. We were just trying to find out, who would do this to her.
When you got to the scene where her car was burned, did you talk to people at the scene?
No, I didn't talk to no one at the scene.
Okay. So did you know that at that time that she had been set on fire?
Mm-hmm. I did.
And how did you know that?
But the medics, the paramedics.
So you talked to them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And when you went into the ambulance at the landing zone, what did you ask her?
I asked her, who did this to you?
Okay. And what did she say?
She stated Eric. That's what she said.
Okay. And did you ask her any other questions?
No. Like I said, she could barely even speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
But did you ask her if it was a white male or a black male?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what was her response?
No, she just said Eric. Like I said, she couldn't have how to talk.
All right. I'm going to hand you a document. And just ask you to look at that. And look down at the very bottom. Is that your report?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Did you ask her if it was a white male or a black male that had done this to her? Did you ask her that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was her response, as best you could understand it?
The best I understand is a black male.
Okay. Now, were you talking to her like you and I are talking right now?
Yes, sir.
Was she that clear to you, or I think you just said that she was having trouble?
She could barely speak,
Okay. Okay. Tender the witness, Your Honor.
All right. Cross.
Good morning, Ms. House.
Good morning.
How are you today?
All right.
Mr. House, you actually went to the scene.
Yes, sir.
On December the 6th. That's correct, right?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall what time you actually arrived at the scene?
No.
Okay. Now, you testified just a minute ago that you believe you were at the scene for 15 or 20 minutes?
Yeah, yes, sir. At the scene right there. So
And-
we went to the landing zone.
Okay. And when I say the scene, I'm talking about where this incident happened out on Heron Road.
Yes, sir.
You believe you were there for about 15 to 20
Maybe
minutes?
15 to 20 minutes.
And I know it's an estimate,
Yeah.
but that's that comports with what you recall as you sit here today? Okay. Now, did you speak to Ms. Chambers when you were there at the scene on Heron Road?
No, I didn't speak to her then.
Okay. Who did you speak to?
Oh, it was
during this time?
some of the paramedics that was there.
Do you recall any specific people that you actually spoke to?
No, because
Okay.
actually it was seems chaos.
Now, you were actually, where were you when you actually got the call?
I was around the Batesville area when I got the call.
In Batesville?
Yes, sir, around
How long
Batesville.
did it actually take you to get from Batesville to the scene of this incident?
Oh, let's see. We running code. It maybe took 10, 15 minutes, maybe less than that.
Okay. So from the time you actually got the call, it took you about 10 or 15 minutes to get there. Okay. And then you were there for about 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And I believe you indicated that you followed Ms. Chambers to the landing zone?
Yes, sir.
So can I take it that you actually followed the ambulance
Yes,
to
sir.
the landing zone? Okay. Now, when you actually made it to the landing zone, you actually spoke to Ms. Chambers, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were where at the time you had this conversation with her?
Inside the ambulance.
Okay. So this would have been prior to the actual helicopter making it there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was the landing zone?
It was at the church.
Okay, and that would have been how far from the place of this incident?
Ooh, maybe it wasn't that far. I'm saying.
Okay. How long did it take you to get there? A couple of minutes?
About a couple minutes, yeah.
Cortland
couple of
is-
5 minutes, yeah.
Cortland is a fairly small place.
Yes, sir.
And this was in a fairly close proximity.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You got to the landing zone, and you actually got into the back of the ambulance and spoke with Ms. Chambers, did you
Yes,
not?
sir. I
Okay.
did.
When you spoke to her, could you actually hear her clearly?
You couldn't hear very clearly, no.
Okay. Let me ask you like this. When you spoke to her in the back of the ambulance, was the noise in the back of the ambulance, did it keep you from understanding what she was saying to you?
No,
Okay, you could understand
Yeah.
what she was saying. It was difficult, but you understood it, didn't you?
I did.
And you actually asked her who did this to you.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you said who did this to you, you were referring to setting her on fire,
Yes, sir.
okay? And she responded, Eric.
She did.
How did it sound?
She just said, I asked Miss Chambers, I said, who did it? And she said, Eric.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she, in your report, you indicated that she could barely speak, but you made that out. Okay. Now, did you have to hold your ear down to her face, or could you? Where were you? Were you
Let's see,
kneeling
I
over
was, let's see, when she was landing, I was standing just almost right over top of her.
her? Okay. Were you standing, or were you on the knees?
Yeah, no, I was standing, but I was bent down.
You've been down.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Who else was in the ambulance at the time?
Deputy Tucker was in there also.
Deputy Tucker?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you had a conversation with Ms. Chambers, did you not?
Yes, sir.
And you asked her, as part of your investigation to try to figure out what was going on with this, who did this to you?
Yes, sir.
And she said Eric.
Yes, sir.
And you indicated if it was her boyfriend. You asked her if it was her boyfriend or not. Did you ask her that?
No, I didn't ask her that. I can't recall.
Mr. Champion handed your report when he was questioning you. Do you still have that report?
No, sir, I don't have it.
Okay, may I approach you on?
You may.
Let me get you to review that, see if it'll refresh your recollections, huh? Do you see the narrative at the bottom there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is that the report that you actually made out for this incident?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And take a look at that. Just let me know when you finish.
Okay.
You finished?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, after you reviewed that report, do you recall asking her whether or not it was a boyfriend?
No.
Okay. So, do you see that part of the report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it indicates that you asked her if it was a boyfriend.
Okay, yeah.
Do you see that?
Yeah, I see it now.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
And what I'm trying to get to is, did you actually ask her that? Now that you look at the report, do you
Yes, sir.
recall asking her that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And she stated to you that it wasn't her boyfriend. Is that correct?
That's correct. Mhm.
Okay. And then You actually took a photo of Miss Chambers?
Yes, sir.
Why did you take the photo of her, Mr. House?
On all scenes, like I said, when something like this happens, we have to take photos.
Was that just part of you
Yes, sir.
investigating
Part
this?
of our investigation, yes, sir.
Were you actually on scene when the helicopter came?
Yes, sir.
Did you actually speak with any of the people in the helicopter?
No, sir, I did not.
Have the court's indulgence.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, my personal witness to retrieve this report. Thank you, Ms. House.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor.
Redirect?
No, sir, Your Honor.
What instructions would you give the
You may
officer?
be finally released.
All right, sir, you may leave the courtroom or stay in the courtroom, or you can go patrol. Let me call you next witness.
Chuck Tucker.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in law in this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. The witness.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What is your name?
Chuck Tucker.
And are you a Pinota County deputy?
I am.
And how long have you been a deputy?
13 years.
And were you a deputy back on December the 6th of 2014?
Yes.
And what shift were you working on December the 6th of 2014?
I was working the 6P to 6A.
Okay. And do you recall getting dispatched to Heron Road in Cortland?
I do.
And do you remember the nature of the call that came out?
It was a car fire and a female that had been burnt.
And did you know where Heron Road was at that time?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember where you were when you got the call?
I was at Coles Point.
And now they don't understand where Coles Point is. That's out at Sardis Lake. Is that
Yes,
right?
out by the Lafayette County line.
Okay. And did you in fact respond?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Just so the jury will understand the geography, because they're from Tibaha County, understand the geography. Sardis Lake, where does Sardis Lake sit in relation to Batesville?
It's 13 miles east, and then you go about another 5 miles north to the Sardis Lake.
And then in relation to Batesville, where is Cortland?
It's about 5 miles south of Batesville.
So approximately 18 miles from the lake to Cortland.
At
is that
least,
correct?
yes.
Okay. And when you arrived at the scene on Heron Road, where did you go?
I went to the scene first, and when I pulled up at the scene, I was talking on the phone to Major Barry Thompson, and the ambulance was leaving with Jessica, and Darryl House was following the ambulance. Well, Barry told me to go to the landing scene and help them set up the landing scene and see if I could get any information. So I turned around and followed them down to the landing scene.
So did you ever get out at the scene where the car was?
I don't think I did, no.
Okay. And where was the landing zone in relation to the scene where Jessica was burned?
It was approximately a mile back down on Main Street, which Heron Road turns into Main Street, right there in the church parking lot by the railroad tracks.
Did you know Jessica?
Yes,
I believe her father worked with y'all at that time. Is that
Yes.
correct? And I believe what was Ben's responsibility with?
he was a mechanic at the sheriff's department.
Okay. Did you recognize, or did you go into the ambulance?
I did,
And did you recognize her?
yes.
What was her condition?
She was basically burnt from head to toe, hair singed,
skin hanging everywhere. I mean, it was pretty bad.
You ever seen anything like that?
Not while they're still alive, no.
Did you and Darryl talk to Jessica?
Yes, we did.
And what did you ask her?
I asked her who did this, and she responded what sounded like Eric.
Now, was she speaking like you and I are talking right
No,
now?
not at all.
Well, describe for the jury how she was talking.
It was real low and mumbled. And I asked her, I said, Eric who? And she said, no. And I said, you don't know? No. But, I mean, I don't know if she was saying no, not Eric, or no, she didn't know Eric's last name. But she was saying no.
And did you ask her the color of the person who had done this?
Later, right as I was talking to her, my phone rang, and it was the sheriff. So I got out of the ambulance to speak with the sheriff. And he was en route there. And the sheriff asked me if he was black or white. And I told her, I said, I'll find out. So I got back in the ambulance, and I asked her, I said, Jessica, was he black or white? And she said black.
Once again, did she say black like you and
Not
I?
real plain, no. I mean, you had to listen. She was real low and mumbled, and I mean, she was having difficulty breathing. You could see the skin in her nose going in and out as she was breathing rapidly, trying to breathe. And so, no, she was not plain at all. She never tried to make a full sentence or statement at all. It was just yes or no or something like that.
And when you asked her who did this, and she said, or what you thought you heard to be Eric.
That's what it sounded like,
And
yes.
then she immediately after that said no.
She said no. When I asked her, Eric who, what was his last name? She said no. Okay. And I'm like, you don't know his last name? No. So.
After you spoke with her, and I assume you weren't in there very long, is that right?
No, not at all.
Okay, what did you do after you left the ambulance?
Well, after I went back in and asked her if he was black or white, the helicopter was landing and crew was getting ready to package her, so I stepped back out of the ambulance. And at that time, the sheriff had arrived on scene, and I was standing there filling him in on what had been said so far.
Did you have any other contact with Jessica?
No.
Okay. Into the witness, Your Honor.
Cross-examine.
Good morning, Deputy Taker.
Good morning.
You talked about going to the scene first.
Yes, sir.
And when you're talking about going to the scene, you're talking about out on Heron Road.
Right.
I believe you indicated that when you arrived there, you left pretty quickly.
Yes, sir.
And so you may have also indicated that you never even got out of the vehicle.
I don't remember getting out, no.
So you didn't, when you were out, let me ask you, did you actually have an occasion to go back to the area at Heron Road?
That night? No.
No, at some point later.
I've been through there, but no, not to look for any evidence or anything, no.
Okay, so you never did any
No, sir.
inspections for evidence. Okay. Now, you actually followed the ambulance and Deputy House out
Right.
to...
I was a little ways behind them, because like I say, when I pulled up, I was on the phone with Major Barry Thompson, I believe is who I was on the phone with. So I sat there and talked to him a minute, and then I turned around and went down where they was at.
And you went down to the landing zone?
Yes,
Were you
Deputy
involved-
House was already in the ambulance when I got there.
Certainly. Were you already involved in setting up the landing? Were you involved in setting up the landing zone?
Well, they actually had it done when I got down there.
Okay. And you talked about speaking with Ms. Chambers on 2 separate occasions during this short time frame.
Right.
Okay. Now, Mr. House, I believe you testified, was already in the ambulance when you arrived?
Yes.
Okay. So you were actually present when Mr. House was actually speaking with Ms. Chambers?
Some of it.
Okay.
I mean, he had already taken pictures and spoke with her before I got in the ambulance.
Certainly.
Yes.
So you had a separate conversation with Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Is that true?
Pretty much, yes.
And you actually had 2 separate conversations
Yes.
with her. Now, I understand that you were in the back of the ambulance.
Yes.
Describe, was it noisy in the back of the ambulance?
Not real noisy, no.
Okay. You could hear.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. When you were at the scene out on Heron Road, did you actually roll your windows down?
I did not.
Okay, so you don't.
I was on the phone, so no, I didn't put my windows
So you can't
down.
really testify as to what that scene was like noise-wise?
No.
But in the back of the ambulance, you could hear clearly, could you not?
Yeah, it's some noise in there because you got the medics moving around. They're getting stuff ready, opening packages. I mean, they're doing all kind of stuff, and then getting everything ready. So
Yes, sir.
I mean, it's not like complete silence in there, no.
But that noise didn't prevent you from hearing Ms. Chambers?
Well,
did it?
her ability to speak was the only problem with hearing because she was real low.
Okay, let me clarify this. Her speaking, she was struggling to speak.
Yes.
Correct? But you could hear her even though that speech was low. Would you
Yes.
agree with that?
I could tell what she was saying, mumbling, yes.
Right. And you identify that when you asked her who did this to her, her response was Eric, was it not?
That's what it sounded like, yes.
And you asked her what was his last name. And you could make out that she said no?
No.
Okay. And you weren't sure whether or not she was saying no, she didn't know his last name, or what?
Or no, I had it wrong when I said Eric who, or I didn't know if she meant no, not Eric, or no, she didn't know the last name.
Right. But you're sure she said Eric, is
That's
that
what it
correct?
sounded like. I'm not sure of it, no, but that's what
Okay.
it sounded like.
Well, could it have been something else?
It could have been.
But in your report, you put Eric, did
Yes,
you not?
that's
And
what
then-
that's what it sounded like I heard, so that's what I put in my report.
Thank you.
yes.
And that report was completed when?
I didn't do that report it was about a year later.
Okay. You did your report a year later?
Yes,
Now, you exited the ambulance after the first conversation and
Yes.
had a conversation with Major Thompson, is that
no,
correct?
with the sheriff at
With
that
the sh-
point.
With the
yes.
sheriff. And the sheriff would be who?
Dennis Darby.
Mr. Darby. So you spoke with Mr. Darby, and Mr. Darby gave you some instruction at that point, is that correct?
Yes.
And his instruction was what?
He asked me if I found out if she was black or white.
Okay.
He was black or white, and I told him that I hadn't got to that point yet. And he told me he was on the way to the scene. I told him I would find out.
Certainly. Now, when he asked you that, and please correct me if I misstate your testimony, but Sheriff Darby was asking you whether he was black or white.
Right.
Who was he?
Whoever did this, Eric or whoever done this,
Right. So
was trying to get all the information we can.
you communicated to Sheriff Darby that she had told you Eric. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And Sheriff Darby said, was Eric black or white?
Yes.
And you went back into the ambulance. Was anyone in the back of the ambulance with you at this time?
Yes. Deputy House was still in there, and
He
the
was
medics
still-
were still in there too. Yes.
And you asked her, was the person black or white?
I did.
And she said he was black.
Yes.
You sure about that?
Yes.
Okay. So you're sure that she said he was black, but you're not sure whether or not he said it was Eric?
Well, I mean, black don't sound like, I mean, when you say black or white, I mean, you can't hardly get those two mixed up. I mean, you got the black sound and then you got white. That's definitely two different sounds.
Yes, sir.
I mean, like I say, it was nothing plain, but you could tell that she was saying black.
But you communicated that to your superior,
Yes, I did.
and you relayed that information that Eric had, or that the information you had was that Eric did this, and Eric was black.
Yes.
And you communicated that to your boss or your superior, Mr. Darby.
Yes.
You came back out and the helicopter was landing, correct?
Yes.
And do you know when you came back, when you actually got to the scene, you indicated that Mr. House had already taken pictures.
Yes.
And this would have been before you actually entered the back of the ambulance for the first time.
Correct.
Did you actually see those pictures?
No, I did not,
How did you know he had taken them?
because he told me he did.
Okay.
I was the supervisor on shift that night. It's the reason they was calling me.
Just trying to get some clarity,
Okay.
Mr. Tucker. Now, did Mr. House communicate anything to you concerning his conversations?
Not at that time, no.
Did he communicate with you concerning those conversations at a later point?
I read his report and checked his report.
Did you When you read his report, did you come to the realization that Ms. Chambers communicated with you something very similar?
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. House's report said she told him Eric, and you were like, well, that's the same thing she told me.
Yes.
Both of you all had that understanding.
Yep.
Would you agree with that?
That's it.
Okay. Ask the court's indulgence.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Tucker, one final question. You indicated in response to a question by Mr. Champion that Jessica's father was working there at the Sheriff's Department,
Yes.
and I believe you indicated that he no longer works there.
No.
Do you know why he no longer works there?
Look, Jack, that's got absolutely no relevance to this case whatsoever.
Your Honor, he opened the door to this.
You care to make a record on that, sir?
I'm asking the court, I didn't hear the court's ruling, Your Honor.
I sustain the objection.
Certainly, Your Honor.
On relevance. You wish to be heard on that?
No, Your Honor.
All right. You may continue.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right. Redirect.
Just one question, Chuck. Mr. Peterson asked you if you had a conversation with Jessica. Do you recall that?
Yes, I remember him asking that, yes.
Did you have a conversation with Jessica?
No. She never made a full sentence or never made a full statement. It was like I said, she struggled to say what appeared to be Eric. She struggled to say black, and then she said cold is what it said. That's the 3 words I heard her say, is all I ever heard her say.
Nothing further. He may be finally released.
You find excused, sir. You may remain in the courtroom and return to duty. Your choice. All right, let's take our morning recess. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to put you in the jury room for about 15 minutes, and I'll send for you when we're ready. Thank you. Courtroom remain in order.